Ready to begin. Welcome to this session of the 2025 Northwest Interlibrary Loan and Resource Sharing Conference. And today is September 11th, last day of our conference. This session is entitled The Received App, International Resource Sharing Made Easy Peasy Free, and will be presented by Lapis Cohen, who is a library specialist in resource sharing at the University of Pennsylvania. I'm Jean, and I'm your convener, so any questions, let me know. Those online too, be sure to tell our tech support person in the room. We also have a mic runner this year. We have a three team helping to get this presentation and support our speaker. So it's being recorded, as you've heard in the other sessions, with permission of the presenters, and these recordings will be made available once we've added captions. So you'll get an email from Hoover when they are ready. We'll take questions at the end of the session, so our virtual colleagues post those into the Q&A section, not the chat, but the Q&A section. Don't forget to upvote your favorites, questions, and after the session, please complete the survey to help, which is important for our presenters and us, and it'll also give you a chance to get some prizes. If anyone in the room is logged into Hoover, you can, but mute yourself. And now I'll turn it over to Lapis. Take it away.
Thank you kindly, Jean. I hope everyone can hear me. I'm not used to working with the microphone, and I also tend to talk with my hands. So on the off chance that I knock myself out, just kind of roll me gently off to the side and go slowly through the slides. But greetings and welcome everyone, both here in person and online around the world. I think I heard Katie say that folks from 7 countries outside the US were registered, so that's wonderful. And let's just jump right into the presentation. So this is the order of the day. And to give credit where it is duly due, here is a picture of the first EP from the fine Danish punk band, The Electric Deads, whose song Order lends the lyric that tends to lend the subject header for my agendas. And also, as I go through this session, I'm going to try, because I like pictures, so I've put a bunch of pictures and screenshots in to very briefly describe any images that are on the screen in case it's helpful for folks with any visual acuity issues or those just resting their eyes, which at this point in the conference, fair. So we will start off with the origins of received and then look on to the evolution of it as a project, getting more granular with both the borrowing and lending sides, and taking a quick look at registration and statistics, brief tangent over to something completely different, and finishing up with Q&A. So let's go. The secret origins of received. So received is actually a couple things. At the macro, very high level, it's a community of volunteer libraries that provide high quality, open, collaborative resource sharing to help librarians ensure universal and equitable access to information around the world. And I'd really just like to take an extra second to underline and accentuate the importance of connections and community, of working together, of sharing resources and mutual aid across borders amongst libraries and library staff of all descriptions and beyond, of course, whether we're talking about sending a scan or answering a question on how to fix a problem or in a more general way. At the same time, Received is also an app through which non-returnables, such as scans of articles, book chapters, ebooks, and such like, can be requested by librarians at registered not-for-profit institutions, and then filled by librarians at other registered volunteer supplying libraries for free. And timing being everything, I just like to take another tangent for a second to say that this is all in the context of international resource sharing. Folks at this conference have talked about all the various systems that they use, whether it's WorldShare, Tapasa, Iliad, Dockline, Rapid ILL, and there are always going to be things that are outside of your network in terms of what your patrons need. So this is in the context of those times when on the borrowing side, you would want to go outside of your local or consortial networks. And then on the lending side, there was a mention in the it costs what session yesterday in terms of the duty of lending or the duty of resource sharing. So from the lending side, it's that part of community that's the mindset of, I'm perhaps working in an institution which has the bandwidth and the capacity to supply internationally. Perhaps we can do that. And lastly, as you'll already have heard multiple times, RSCVD is often pronounced received, but hey, we're not the boss of you. If you prefer risk void, I am here for you. So history is fundamental. And let's take just a quick look. I mean, it's a tiny bit painful to look back at those times, but just a quick look back to where we were in March of 2020. Most folks were stuck at home. Most folks also did not live in libraries. And thus, most libraries and print collections were not accessible. And if a library's doors are locked, does that make it just a jail for books? But people still needed information, perhaps then more than ever, really. And as was their wont, the library community was still working to help, sharing solutions on how to aid each other and our respective patrons, even whilst isolated physically and otherwise. So for example, you might recall the ACOVE, BCOVE, and CCOVE, OCLC profile groups that help streamline discovery of what libraries could supply from which formats, or alternately, the virtual learning opportunities and resources for the ILL community webpage created and shared by Meg Massey of Penn State. So just how did Received come into being? Face front, true believer. Bitten by a radioactive ILL librarian, hundreds of library staff around the world are mysteriously endowed with the power of, alas, we do not live in that timeline, which I'm sure is probably a better timeline than the one we're going through right now. And on advice of counsel, a legal disclaimer. Parker Posey, who is pictured here, balancing 3 books upon her head, is no more naturally radioactive than the average human. No commentary on Ms. Posey's superpowers is implied or intended. And I know, a wall of text in a fairly small font is a PowerPoint presentation worst practice. For shame, Lapis, for shame. But history is still fundamental, and I just wanted to present, for folks to take a look at later on if they download the slides. The email on the screen, which was sent out to diverse resource sharing listservs on April 21st of 2020 by the International Federation of Library Associations and Institutions Document Delivery and Resource Sharing Section, henceforth just IFLA DDRS, was perhaps the first time that many folks would have heard about Received. And it also served as a firm declaration of intent, some of the text that is bolded, to facilitate international resource sharing at a time when those activities were very difficult, nigh impossible in some places, while patron need was, essentially higher than ever. IFLA DDRS created a simple way for libraries to request for their users anywhere in the world as long as they had an internet connection, and then also for library workers to volunteer, often from home, to supply scans for free outside of any pre-existing consortia or resource sharing networks. There was no money that needed to be paid, no other registration that needed to be done. You just had to be at a nonprofit, not-for-profit institution, and literally sign up and make the request. And taking a look back at that 2022 era request form, when RSCVD stood for Resource Sharing During COVID-19, it was created with help from Instant ILL, and librarians from those not-for-profit libraries could place requests for their patrons using what was essentially a simple Google form, entering either a standard number to search or a full title of an article, or manually entering a complete citation, where an open access version could be found and was acceptable to the patron. Those were available for immediate download, and requests could be filled electronically for example, via article exchange. And from the start, the system was fully web-based and also did not require the download of or purchase of any specialized software. Now taking a peek at the other side of the coin here, the version 1.0 lending side, which was, as one can see from the screenshot here, an online spreadsheet to which the volunteer supplying libraries had access. Requests from new libraries were vetted by IFLA DDRS members to make sure they were not from individuals or for-profit organizations, and then potential suppliers could search by the information in those various citation fields / cells. So thousands of requests, hundreds of volunteers across 38 columns of fun. And it was such a large spreadsheet that my memory is that instead of working from the online spreadsheet, I would download the current version and work from that for fear of messing things up for those hundreds of librarians around the world. Volunteers could search by a journal title or article title or ISSN before they would claim an article by updating in the status column, and then they get updated to filled when they were able to send that article, most often, again, from their e-resource collections at that point in time, but occasionally from print, depending on the medical and public policy realities in that locality. Received had been set up to be quick, functional, and this was absolutely serviceable, admirable even, but not really scalable or sustainable long-term. And so, omnia mutantur, everything changes. In March of 2021, IFLA DDRS was awarded the 2020 IFLA Dynamic Unit Award for Received. And also in 2021, the Received initiative was funded by the European Erasmus Plus program through Project Hermes, strengthening digital resource sharing during COVID, and most importantly, and beyond, to reinforce the service and ensure the sustainability that was needed for a project that folks really saw the value in. The project moved to the use of a new open source software, Talaria, named for the winged sandals of Hermes, messenger of the gods in the Greek pantheon. And as you'll see illustrated on the right here from the Imperial Dictionary of 1882. Also, having moved past the worst of the pandemic, in November of 2023, the Received acronym was updated to mean resource sharing, collaborative, and voluntary document delivery. So it feels like there should be a second D at the end there, but there isn't. I guess the funding issues didn't go as far as that. And just exceedingly briefly, because it's a tiny bit outside the scope of what this session is on, but the Received app platform is formed under the backbone of Talaria, which is a free open source resource sharing management software. It's released under a GPL 3.0 license, which is a free copyleft license that allows sharing and updating of the software as long as those new versions are shared with the same freedom of usage. For those folks that are a bit more curious about that type of licensing, more information is linked out via the slides, which will be available in Whova if they're not already. And Talaria is designed to be flexible and customizable. And for those folks that really want to delve more deeply into the software side of it, there's the software user manual pictured on the screen here, and that is available from the Received homepage, which will be linked out under the further resources slide near the end of this presentation. If people are really curious, they can skip ahead now and just listen as I move forward. So where in the world is Received? All over the place, as it happens, as seen from this flourish map, which is highlighting membership. When last I checked and created this slide a few weeks ago, there were 339 volunteer libraries from 39 different countries, which was already a sizable increase from the early days of about 100 different libraries from 21 countries, and it's still growing. And when I checked right before I left Philadelphia for this conference, there were 350 libraries from 41 countries. So growth is absolutely ongoing. I think just as important to note is that there's participation by libraries in a lot of countries that are all too often siloed on the resource sharing front. A lot of networks, whether it's OCLC or RAPID, do deal with some countries outside of the United States, but it's still very North American, still very Western European centric. And as can be seen from the map, a lot of the countries thus far involved in Received are outside the global North. And I think it's, perhaps an apropos moment to point back to that Received community's initial statement of intent with its goal of universal and equitable access to information around the world. And as part and parcel of that goal, the Received app interface, as seen in these screenshots here, is currently available in 4 different languages: English, Italian, Spanish, and Turkish, with more choices and more languages certainly anticipated in the future. And to paraphrase the poet Kevin Seconds, we work together, we share together. The International ILL Toolkit is another project founded in the early days of the pandemic with the goal of aiding international resource sharing. Conceived by Brian Miller at The Ohio State University and incubated in that hothouse of ideas that are the weekly Shares town halls, as generously overseen by the inimitable Dennis Massey, head of the OCLC Research Library Partnership. The toolkit is a freely available online asset, which includes a listing of over 350 lenders from around the world who are able to supply globally with contact information, catalog, and request form links, request payment and delivery method information. There are also more than 50 tips and tricks to help with global resource sharing. And finally, ILL request form templates in what's sure to be a Taylor Swift approved 13 different languages. And for those who put money in the pool, it took me until slide 15 to mention the International ILL Toolkit. 15 is the winner. At the American Library Association ALA conference in San Diego back in June of 2024, members of the IFLA DDRS/Received Committee, such as Peter Bay and Silvana Mangiaricina, joined in conversation with some folks from the Rusa Stars International ILL Committee, who now oversee the toolkit, such as Rena Red, Joanne McIntyre, Cable Stanwix, myself, to discuss ways that our 2 initiatives could cross-pollinate and collaborate more fruitfully to supplement each other's services. After additional conversation with our respective full committees back in November of 2024, we were ready to announce our collaboration, as seen in the screenshot at the top here, along with a teeny tiny picture of some handwritten notes from that historic ALA face-to-face meetup. And what was funny was kind of each side took notes, and when we met up again a day later and Silvana was talking about some of the ideas that she had, I just put down this piece of paper and pointed to the notes and said, we are on the same page, because it was all the same points. On the toolkit side, we added more information and links to Received on the tips page, and also added a new column specifically for Received membership on the lender listing sheets to enable ease of filtering for borrowers so that they could see which libraries were Received members and more readily search their linked online catalogs. So now, finally, at long last, we get to more of the current day, the so-called easy peasy part. When this presentation was initially proposed, it was going to be just like a quick lightning round pre-recorded session, and I anticipated about a 7-minute presentation. It's good to be able to share the history and thoughts on the community, but this is what Received looks like nowadays. So here is the main login page, and this is also where you would have the choice of the language dropdown. English, UK only at this time. I hear American will be in the 2026 or 2027 iteration. Italian, Spanish, and Turkish. And it's a drop-down menu that you can choose anytime you log in, or anytime when you're after you've logged in as well. After logging in, you can click on the Go button, which is the little blue button in that little red box in the lower half of the screenshot, to go to the main Received dashboard. or you can click on the new request button, which is the slightly more rectangular green button, to go to create a borrowing request directly. And taking a look at that borrowing request tab, the new request option being pictured here, you can search by any number of standard identifiers, such as Digital Object Identifier, or DOI, PubMed Identifier, PMID, International Standard Book Number, or ISBN, or the exact title known universally as ET. Or alternately, you can click on that Go button to enter a full citation in a request form. An open access search is part of the citation search. And again, as it was in the early days, if an open access match is found, a link will display to enable immediate download. Again, if that serves your patrons' needs, they might need the publication of record, in which case you could fill out a complete citation for them and send it out to other libraries. But even if an open access match cannot be made, if a citation match can be made, that information is imported into the request form, for example, from a DOI or PMID or an exact title search. And this is a quick look at the manual requesting form with pretty much the usual fields that a lot of folks will be familiar with. There's a publication/format type choice for article, book, thesis/dissertation, map, or manuscript even. Some fields like the journal title, article, author, year, volume, and pages are required fields. Others like issue, publisher, PMID, or DOI are optional. Notes to lenders such as please make sure to include any supplemental material can be included as well to send to the supplying library. And in one respect, the choosing of lenders, the received workflow is slightly different from many other resource sharing platforms. On one side, as a borrower, once you've created a new request, you can, as per usual, send it to a specific received lending library. Hey, maybe you found holdings in a catalog linked down from the International ILL Toolkit. The screenshot on the screen here shows the radio button option to send the request to the, with apologies for my fairly poor Italian pronunciation, Biblioteca Dario Nobile Seanar di Bologna. But where received is different from most other resource sharing platforms that I'm familiar with, you also have the choice to send a request to the entire received collective. That would be the all libraries radio button as shown here. And we'll go into that a little bit more deeply when we reach the lending section, but it's also a situation where you don't necessarily need to track down the holdings. You can just say, can anybody fill this? Now, do you love dealing with all the additional paperwork and extra financial and carbon costs of paying for ILL scans by snail mailing physical plastic-coated IFLA vouchers around the world? Paying by check in a foreign currency? Setting up a successful international wire transfer and finding SWIFT and IBAN codes? You do? Well, our condolences. Received is free. And per the 2023 ALA RUSA Stars International ILL Survey, it turns out international payment hassles are not universally loved, with apologies for the spoilers. So let's now take a look at that other side of the equation, lending. On the lending tab, requests that are sent directly to you will appear under pending requests, but honestly, that's really uncommon. Received doesn't have exact statistics now for how many requests are sent directly to potential supplying libraries, although that functionality is envisioned. But at Penn, honestly, we've received only a handful of direct requests over the last year. And about half of those were actually meant for our cross-Commonwealth friends/competitors, Penn State. Thankfully, they are also Received members, so we could just let the borrowing libraries know, go to our folks across the state. So, I mean, and also in case folks are curious, please note that their international standard identifier for libraries and related organizations, their ISIL symbol is US-PST, while University of Pennsylvania's is US-PU, which I don't know, I feel like there's some commentary there when that was handed down. Thanks, Library of Congress. But at Penn, we tend to check our pending requests at least 2 to 3 times a week, often more, but really 99 times, 98, 99 times out of 100, we see what you are seeing on the screen here, which is essentially no direct requests that have been sent to us. And purely anecdotally, I've heard the same from a bunch of other Receive members around the world. So in case folks are worrying about, will I be inundated by requests coming into me? The answer is probably not. Where most requests go is into this orphaned requests queue, which are the requests sent to the full received collective. And as it is said, from each according to their abilities, to each according to their needs. Here we see the listing of requests. The borrowers have been blanked out for anonymity purposes, but these were actual real requests. Lenders can search the visible citation list by journal title or article title in a local discovery database, or sometimes via a DOI or PMID link, which will appear in the request, and those are active links. So if there's a DOI there and you're logged into your local system, you might be able to get to your e-resource directly in that fashion. Once a lender has determined that they can fill a request, they can claim it by clicking on the little parachute button, which is to the right side of the request, which is circled there in a magenta color, if memory serves. And as previously noted, this is different from most other resource sharing systems and allows supplying volunteer libraries to fill what they can, not only based on holdings and license agreements, and that's pretty universal, but also by staff bandwidth available to deal with requests. So if you have staff outages and you can't deal, with processing any requests in a given week, there is no obligation to do so. But if you have folks that are looking for things to do and they have, the time and the desire to go through those orphan request queues, they also can do that. And just as a quick side note, the print and export functionality, which can be seen by these teeny tiny little buttons just above the requests, is another anticipated but not yet active functionality. And there's also no means currently to automatically import received requests into other resource sharing software via ISO 18626, for example. However, there's been some informal conversations with Mark Sullivan and the folks at the IDS Projwerk. No connection to Kraftwerk there. Their new title is the IDS Network. And then, thank you for this. Thank you for your support. And in those conversations to see if their new Crosslink project, which enables conversations between various resource sharing softwares, might serve to help on that front. So nothing established yet, but stay tuned. And after a request has been claimed and thus moved over to your pending requests queue, the requested scan has been saved locally. And we tend to claim a request only once we've verified we can definitely fill it. So typically for us, it's once we have that PDF downloaded and safely saved away. We had one bad experience once, and that was traumatic. So we try and only claim stuff after we know for sure we can fill it. But again, that kind of workflow is up to you. A lender can click on the arrow button circled in red to move things on to the delivery stage. And as seen in the screenshot slightly below, a lender can fulfill the blue button to send the scan out, but they can also click on the cannot fulfill button at this stage if they're not able to for any reason, and there's no judgment. Various delivery methods are available in the received app and is seen here in the drop-down list. The one that's the most popular and the one that we use is FILE, standing for Secure file delivery, although delivery via URL, article exchange, or snail mail are also possibilities, snail mail being very rare, of course. So with secure article delivery, you would click on the browse button to locate your already saved file, whether it's on your local computer or in a shared space. And then you would click on the upload button. A message will then, and then you would choose the file, of course. A message will then note that the file was uploaded successfully. Typically, when we save files, we append the received request number at the beginning, typically ahead of the article title, just for ease of identification, both when we're uploading it and then hopefully, for the borrowing side as well, although the request is coming back to them with that identifier. So that's just kind of something that we do as an extra added value bonus. There's a lender note field that you could use to send a URL or the article exchange URL and password if you've used either of those methods. And then you would simply click on the submit button at the bottom of the page to send the email notification to that borrowing library. How you choose to process requests is also entirely up to you. You can add requests and records for individual borrowing libraries into your resource sharing system if that functionality is available, such as in ILLIAD. You could add a record for, University of Bologna. You could then add, records for individual requests if that works in, your workflow and staff bandwidth. Alternately, you can keep track via a simple spreadsheet in a shared space, which is what we do. So with just the information that we need to report, in this case, the journal title, the ISXN, publisher, year of publication, and the borrower country. We also have a prohibited publisher listing, which is up in red in the top right, from whom we are not able to supply. I've lavendered that out. So there's no need to really name and shame, tempted as I am. But which, as folks can see here, is thankfully really quite short. So, really best to consider your local policies, staff bandwidth, and the needs of other library stakeholders, such as those who use interlibrary loan statistics, what records need to be available moving forward, and as per usual, your mileage, this is a global presentation, your image may vary. So if any of that sounds like something you or your library would be interested in investigating, you can always certainly register via the URL shown on the screen here, receive.ifla.org/participate/received-volunteer. That registration form is also linked out from the main Receive page, which I promise you will be in the further resources listing of links at the end of this presentation. You just look for register under the volunteer dropdown on that page. And please note that while you can certainly register as a full lender/borrower member library, if you just want to dip your toe and see what the Received app feels like, or to try and build a case with your institution in terms of folks at higher levels of the org chart for full membership by pointing out, for example, the number of scans received for free for your patrons from around the world that they would not have been able to get otherwise, you can also certainly register as a borrower only. And so I swear that Meg and I did not coordinate our slides. Oh. And other strange fact, I've never seen an episode of It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia. That may have to change. But that being said, it is always sunny in Statsadelphia. And we won't get very too far into the weeds with statistics. And I see some tears already starting to flow. And no matter how much everybody else loves them, but just like a few snapshots. And also, please be aware that the timeframes between the early days and the latter days don't match up directly. It's just what was available on the Received website, and to give people an idea of what the borrowing and lending numbers were. And also, as anybody that's dealt with stats and COVID knows, anything from COVID times is just a big asterisk anyway. So take a quick look, and from April of 2020 through January of 2023, 13,537 requests were filled out of 22,142 that were requested, for a fill rate of 61%, But that's actually, I feel, really quite respectable, given how many titles were simply not accessible during that period. These were supplied by more than 100 volunteer libraries from 21 different countries, and again, compared to 350 in 41 countries now. More recently, in terms of stats, from July of 2023 to April of 2025, on the borrowing side, a smidge over 5,000 scans were received with an 80% success rate. 98 of those were delivered by secure file delivery, another like 1.9% via URL or article exchange, and about 20 via snail mail. And on the lending side, a wee bit over 5,100 requests were fulfilled with an 89% success rate. And new for 2025, your own stats, available immediately from the statistics tab on the received app dashboard, including some built-in visualizations, such as the lending request fill rate seen here, but you can also always access your borrowing and lending received fulfilled stats, publication type distribution, delivery method, reasons for no, fill rate, turnaround time, and country distribution. And while it's possible to export requests sent and received in a CSV format, it has a lot of the request information, but not all of it, such as the journal title. So we chose to keeping track via our own spreadsheet versus that export functionality. So now, as promised earlier, for something completely different, and not going to lie, this is really totally unconnected to the received app, but perhaps it is in resonance with the received community ethos. So even if received is not a good fit for your library at this time, perhaps it might be possible to think about piloting a small scale project based on connections your library or institution already has. For example, Penn has a longstanding 20-year connection with health science institutions and their affiliated libraries in Guatemala, the Penn Guatemala Health Initiative. Back in 2019, a group of staff and faculty from Penn visited Guatemala, and upon his return, one of the staff members, Manuel de la Cruz Gutierrez, director of the Holman Biotech Commons at Penn, presented to fellow library staff about their trip and their interactions with the librarians in Guatemala. Posting please on Twitter or direct emails amongst the librarians was their most common way of requesting ILL, with certainly very limited reach and predictably fairly low success rates. And the question arose in that meeting, was there perhaps a better alternative? So conversation continued with Manuel, with Sheila Ketchum, who was then the head of Interlibrary Loan at Penn, with Peter Collins, who was then still at Penn, and with Regina de la Vega from Universidad Francisco Marroquin in Guatemala, with a decision made to enable the dozen Guatemalan health sciences libraries the ability to register as free borrowers, able to request via Penn's online Iliad lending webpage, with all scans supplied free of charge via article exchange. And because everyone still loves stats, 674 articles have been supplied to those a dozen health science libraries for their patrons since the project began in 2019 through the end of this most recent fiscal year in June, with a fill rate of 88%. The screenshot here also shows how Universidad de Valle de Guatemala references the program in their preguntas frecuentes, their FAQ as artículos UPenn, explaining this cooperative service to their own patrons. And just as a side note, the Library of Congress has their own somewhat larger scale emerging nations article exchange program. And I would certainly love to hear about other similar programs or ideas for programs, either in chat or in conversation at the end. And as promised many, many times, here are those linked to the various further resources that might be of interest. Most importantly, the received homepage, which has tons of information on the community and on the app, on registering, workflow, statistics, written and video documentation, much more. There's also a link to the International ILL Toolkit landing page with a link to the toolkit and more information about that service and prior webinars, more received statistics on the Dahlia repository page, links to older International ILL survey reports at the bottom of the Rusa Stars International ILL Committee page, and then also a link to a IFLA DDRS webinar on YouTube by Peter Bay at Bowdoin College and Ibrahim Farah of University of Balamand in Lebanon on the importance of connections and community, because without those connections and community, resource sharing would not work. And then lastly, and just in case anybody is interested, one of the most fun times I have at conferences is talking not only about library stuff, but about music stuff. And Dev Singer's question about what music do you listen to while doing ILL on the Hoova boards resonated. And so here's just a very quick listing of some of the music listened to while creating this slide deck. A lot of it is non-US, non-UK, non-English music. So maybe it falls under the general umbrella for this session. So now we can get to the end, the Q&A. And as much as I love, folks, you may think I love hear like a monologue, I prefer honestly a polylog. So, happy to try and answer any questions anybody in the room or online might have, but conversation is also good. And because I didn't have a meet the presenter slide, here's a picture of what I actually look like without the makeup. And secondly, because I didn't have a slide about University of Penn and its statistics, here is a picture of our justly world famous ebook stacks. So with that, I'll hand things over to you and fire away the questions.
Thank you, Lapis. We do have some questions online and probably in the room. I'll get started with one online, and then we'll take one in the room if there's hands up, and Melissa will take the mic over. So first question, do you know the proportion of different library types in the received network, like public, academic, etc.?
There is a library directory on the received homepage, and I don't know the percentages. My suspicion is that it is strongly biased towards academic libraries, but I don't have any specific numbers.
One from the room.
Hi, so we're a received library partner. We're lending. I just want to put a plug. It's really like simple and satisfying, especially when you get that end of the year, like all the countries that you lent to in the year list. But from the borrowing side, we've started to dip our toes in the water, and I wonder if there's any way to tell like how active a library is in the borrowing realm. Inside the application, because sometimes you feel like I know that this library owns it, but I don't know if they're, a super active lender.
I know that the statistics, are definitely by country. I don't know. I mean, in terms of what like the community can see, if they're able to see, for example, like, do I want to, how do I feel these other libraries? Are they a very active lender or are they not? I mean, you can certainly see, obviously, your own stats. I don't recall seeing, those stats, for bars if you wanted to look up, anybody else to see how active they are. I think it's more country by country. I could be wrong on that. I have not looked for that up until now, but it's a good, question, a good thing to check out when I get back. Yes.
Okay, one from online. Let's see, they're popping in, and I had one and I lost it again. I missed this, but can anyone sign up and use this suite? I mean, use this app and site. So I think you answered that, but maybe reiterate.
Yeah, I mean, any not-for-profit library around the world can sign up, and it's a matter of like signing up at the institution level, but not-for-profit being really the only defining factor. And then within an organization, typically one person signs up as kind of like the manager of the service, and then they can add accounts for other staff members if multiple staff members process the various borrowing or lending requests within it. But it's open to everyone, and encouraged.
Any more in the room, or I'll go do another online one?
There's a couple.
Hi. How do y'all get around the international copyright laws on some of these materials?
I mean, everything is filled, in terms of in accordance with copyright as it normally would be. I mean, so for example, in terms of that listing, we fill primarily from our e-resources because of our, staffing realities, but it's, fully in terms of what that license agreement is. And then you also have the choice of what to fill or what not to fill. So for example, if someone requests, 10 articles from an issue, and there were 10 articles in that issue, I mean, you probably wouldn't go in and fill all 10, or they could request a copy of an entire book, and you wouldn't go in and fill it either. And also because primarily you're choosing what to fill, it can be, again, by your holdings, by your license agreement, by, also by copyright, that if something exceeds what you as a lender feel is, not workable by copyright, you just wouldn't fill it. I mean, but it's kind of like with most resource sharing networks, it's like borrowers can request anything and lenders can say no. Does that answer your question? Or if you, I mean, I'm happy to try and.
Sorry. Hi. Copyright's a passion topic of mine, but I'm not a lawyer. Standard answer there. The international basis of that is usually institutions around the world will lend via the copyright law of their land. So when we lend something to Canada or anywhere else, we base it off of the copyright law of the United States, Canada based on Canada law, Germany based on Germany copyright law. So that's how that's usually handled.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's just whatever your country law is, then often that's a little bit, more granular in terms of what your institution, what their risk, version is in terms of what you decide to fulfill or not.
Kind of a two-part question. What is the order, if you're a lender and you go in there, what is the order of the requests that show up? And then how do you, if there are pages and pages, how do you approach what to look at to see if you can fill it or not?
So in that open request queue, it's kind of reverse chronological with the most recent at the top, and then it just goes back. I think there's 50 requests per page. And in terms of how you would process it, again, it kind of depends on bandwidth. What I do is I have a little piece of paper that has the number of the last request that I, looked at or filled. And then I will try and, look from that point on the next time I log in. But there might be I'm not processing any while I'm at this conference here. When I go in, a lot may have passed, and I might say, I'm just going to go from the current page. So you can kind of start anywhere. I mean, you can start with, the most recent 10, or you can kind of go back to the oldest in terms of things that you have not looked at yet. Again, that's just by, individual bandwidth. And what's nice is that the success rates are really kind of fairly high. So I would anticipate when I get back, even though I have not been processing for a week, there won't necessarily be a huge jump, because the things that sit there, are either things, that can't be filled, but a lot that are kind of in the middle, will get processed over that week. People are very active and very generous in what they're able to fill. And because it's so global and there's so many different libraries, so many different types of libraries, a lot of stuff gets filled. But again, where you process from is entirely up to you.
I still have two short ones online too. We are over time, but if people want to stay, that's
Catch
okay.
the last one in here, and the ones online will be answered later.
Okay.
Folks who know the answers.
I'll try to make it quick. This is very cool. And it reminds me a lot of, I'm a volunteer librarian for the Prison Library Support Network, and they use Airtable, where you can also kind of claim a letter if you want to answer it. And they have a feature where you can search by topic. Is there a possibility that if I work for a law library, if I know I have access to more legal resources, could I search by kind of a filter, or is that something that's maybe in the works or not really necessary?
It's not something I've ever done, and I'm trying to remember if there's kind of a little search box on that page. I mean, you could certainly do a Control F and look for individual things, but I think it's also something where there's 50 requests per page. It's probably almost as easy, because there'd be multiple search terms. There's probably 10 or 15 like keywords that you could think of off the top of your head that might be useful, rather than searching each of those, just to kind of quickly scan down. And it's also possible, as I say, that there is like a little kind of search box that does filtering. Also something that's a great point and something I'll be looking into when I get back. So thanks for that question.
Thank you.